It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
How are you going to deal with the rebellion on welfare?
Nice to see you.
The government's flagship welfare reforms are in trouble as more than 120 Labour MPs threaten to rebel.
The defence investment plan that allies will agree in The Hague introduces a new baseline, 5% of GDP to be invested in defence.
Keir Starmer's off to NATO armed with a promise to meet that target. But where should the money come from?
The British people have spoken and the answer is we're out.
That was 9 years ago today. Has Brexit been a success? Joining us today, Labour MP Andrew Lewin, Conservative MP Kit Malthouse, Green MP Ellie Chowns and academic and GB News presenter Matthew Goodwin. This is Politics Live. Well, let's start with that brewing Labour rebellion over welfare plans. More than 123 now it is Labour MPs are attempting to block the government's plans to cut the welfare bill by around £5 billion. Now, among those who have signed the amendment are Louise Haigh. She's the former Transport Secretary, and this is what she posted today. She says, disabled people have not been consulted and we've not given enough time for the government's reforms on employment support to work. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, we cannot risk a rushed bill taking money off disabled people. So the question is, how much trouble is the government in on this? I mean, these numbers are growing, well, by the hour. Andrew, what do you think they should do?
Well, good afternoon. First time for me on Politics Live. Thank you
Welcome.
for having me. Thank you, I appreciate that. I would say three things. First of all, we do need to reform the welfare system. I've met too many constituents coming to my surgeries who have had a really awful time with the system as it exists, some really shocking personal stories. And at the same time, the welfare bill is continuing to go up. The second thing I would say is that there are definitely good things in the government's bill, particularly the uplift to universal credit, which will make a significant difference to lots of people. But thirdly, I do also have concerns, particularly about the proposed changes to the PIP eligibility criteria.
That's the personal independence
payments, exactly. And I've been having these conversations privately with colleagues, with whips, with the department over a number of weeks, and I'm still having those conversations. And look, I'll be honest with you, I haven't decided yet how I'm going to vote. I am a new MP, I'm a year into this, I've supported the government throughout and want to continue to do so, but there are still unanswered questions about PIP eligibility, and that's really important.
But so far you haven't signed this amendment?
No, I haven't.
One of the few, by the looks of it, at this point. But you might? You're still thinking you might? You might vote against?
I'm thinking really hard about this. You know, and it's a national programme. My constituents are watching as well. I want them to know I'm thinking really hard. I'm thinking about the people who are in receipt of PIP, those people who are worried and anxious at the moment. I think further conversations need to happen, both privately, and we've got a long way to go. A week is a long time in politics before that vote is due to take place.
OK, Kit, do you think the government's in a lot of trouble on this?
Oh, yeah, massive amounts of trouble. I mean, look, I agree with Andrew. We've got to reform welfare, not least because we can't afford it. And we certainly won't be able to afford it in 10, 15 years' time at this kind of rate of growth. I mean, we're already, you know, I think we're at something like just under 4 workers per pensioner at the moment. And by 2050, 2060, we'll be down sort of towards 2.5. So the bills that we're leaving for our children are going to be massive unless we get on top of it. I'm not sure I would have started with the elderly and the disabled, and I think that's possibly what's causing a huge amount of the problem.
But a lot of people say that, but when it comes to the specifics, they say it needs to change, we need to cut the bill, but when it comes down to specifics and taking money away from people, a lot of politicians aren't ready or willing to do that.
Yeah, well, there are other big budget heads that, you know, you could look at the dynamics of how they work. I mean, every government for the last 10 years has struggled with the housing benefit bill. Which just seems to rise and rise and rise, and whether the dynamics of the property market are serving the welfare system well. I've proposed in national media a different model of child benefit and childcare provision, which is also a bill that is massive, that could be much more efficient and much better for families. So I think that
So you would be not happy, but you would cut the housing benefit bill. That would be where you would look.
I would look at it's huge and it's growing, and we need to do something about it. Whether you would be able to actually cut it rather than just arrest its rate of growth, because a lot of these things are just about arresting the rate of growth. But I do think we need to think from the bottom up about our welfare system, and that extends into how we provide social care as well. Because, as I say, what we're facing is in 10, 15 years' time, our kids basically just not being able to avoid it and having to make even more severe decisions. So, while, as I say, I would not necessarily have started there, and I can understand why all these particularly new younger Labour MPs are looking at themselves thinking, is this really what I knocked on doors to deliver to the voters? I think the overall theme of welfare reform is one that's accepted, frankly, by all parties.
Okay. Ellie, do you think there needs to be cuts?
No, these cuts proposed by the government, they're cruel, they're counterproductive, and they are literally balancing the books on the backs of people who need support. And my inbox as a constituency MP has been full of heartrending emails, actually, from constituents struggling with really serious conditions, but very worried about whether they're going to lose their benefits under this. Benefits that are essential. If you've got a disability, it costs you more to do the things that other people are able to do more easily. And there's all sorts of knock-on effects. People potentially losing eligibility, and then their partner losing carers allowance and so forth. So there are some of the poorest households are standing to lose a considerable amount of money and really being driven into poverty, and that's what the impact assessment shows. So it's completely the wrong thing for the government to be doing. You know, it took them a year nearly to do the U-turn on winter fuel. I very much hope that they do the U-turn on this within a week, and I'm very glad to see that there are a large number of Labour MPs who've found their principles and decided to oppose the government on this. That's very important. From a Green Party perspective, we've been clear all along. There are places in the economy that we could be raising money to support and invest in the public services that we need. For example, a wealth tax. For example, equalising capital gains tax with tax on earned income. It's ridiculous that the government is not taking these choices. Instead, they're making political choices to drive more poor people further into poverty, and that's unacceptable.
We'll come back to that idea in a minute. Matthew, where are you? Welfare cuts? Should the government stick to its guns on this?
Well, the first thing, just on this idea of a wealth tax, I mean, if you listen to the stories today, I don't think there are going to be any more people left in the country to pay a wealth tax, given 16,500 millionaires, I think, have left this year, more than any other country. And it's absolutely crazy. Wealth creators are leaving, prosperity generators are leaving this country because our economy is broken, and welfare is a big reason why. I do not believe that 10 million working-age Brits should be on out-of-work benefits in this country. And I do not think 1 million, if I just come back to that, 1 million young people in this country are not in education, employment, training or work. Meanwhile, while not giving those people an incentive to get back into work, to get off benefits, we are at the same time importing masses of low-skill, low-wage migrants, adding a city the size of Nottingham.
But Ellie's right, PIP is an in-work benefit.
Sure. And universal credit is an in-work benefit.
And the cost of PIP is going to double.
1,000
by the
new
end
claimants
of this
a day.
A double. So 5 billion quid. In all fairness, what's 5 billion quid when it's going to double to 35 billion pounds? We need to get real as a country. The economy isn't working. We need to dramatically reduce the amount that we're paying on welfare. We need to get people back to work and end mass migration. That's what we need to do.
We're going to have more discussion on that in 1 minute. I'm just going to go to our political correspondent, Ian Watson, with the latest on all of this. And Ian, I mean, how much trouble is the government in here? It looks like these numbers are on this amendment, these Labour rebels, is going up by the hour.
It is indeed, yeah. I was texted to say that the 108 potential rebels that we had this morning has now gone up, initially to 119 and then to 123. And just to give you some idea of the numbers, Vicky, that's not simply more than 1 in 4 of all Labour MPs. But when you look at those who've got government jobs who'd have to resign in order to defy their own government, if you take them out of the picture, almost half of all Labour backbenchers are now saying they're unhappy with the government's welfare reforms. They want the government to rethink. They want next Tuesday's vote shelved. They want them to do more work on the impact of the welfare reforms, and they want more work to be done with disabled people who will be affected by these reforms. That is a massive challenge to Keir Starmer's authority just a year after winning a landslide general election victory. The word from number 10, number 11 and the Department for Work and Pensions at the moment is very much that they are going ahead with next Tuesday's vote, that they're going to try to face this down, that these are important reforms, not least because they're expected to save the government £5 billion that they'd have to find elsewhere. The rebels are saying they need some concessions for that vote by the government to potentially to be won next week. It would depend partly on where the Conservatives stand and how they vote. But there are enough Labour MPs to defeat the government where all the opposition parties to join in. That is the level of jeopardy that Keir Starmer is facing. And I just received a text a few moments before coming on air saying that the government now appears to be in full panic mode, said a Labour MP who has served on Labour's front bench and who would not be a natural rebel. But the government at the moment, Vicki, are saying they are standing firm on this. But as we were hearing earlier, a week is indeed a long time in politics, and maybe an absolute eon between now and next Tuesday. So what I'm saying now doesn't mean to say I'd be saying exactly the same a week from now.
It's always good to cover yourself, I think. I mean, what options are there for Keir Starmer here? This is a huge part of his agenda. And if he can't get this through, to his own liking, that's a massive problem for his authority, isn't it?
Well, I think the difficulty is actually when you've got open rebellion. There was previously a letter sent to Labour whips expressing concerns by more than 100 Labour MPs, but these names were private. And somebody was saying to me this morning, we've crossed a line. They've now gone public, a kind of public petition, whether or not this amendment is taken next week, whether it's voted on or not. Just the fact that people are willing publicly to defy him, are we seeing the creation of two Labour parties almost? People who have been frontbenchers in the past, people who you might have thought might be future ministers who didn't come into Parliament to rebel. If he loses authority in this, may they decide that they're going to have a pick and mix approach to their own government for the next 4 years on other issues where they feel uncomfortable. So I think that in itself is a big challenge of party management, and some say they were very frustrated at how things have been handled so far. So that is one difficulty, but more specifically on the welfare changes, he's got a narrow range of options. He either pushes ahead next Tuesday, perhaps gets saved by the Conservatives as they come in behind him, but he advertises divisions in his party with a massive rebellion, or, and this is not a great option either, he decides indeed to shelve the reforms and try again in the autumn.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that. Well, let's speak now to Jen Craft. She is a Labour MP who has signed this amendment. Thank you for speaking to us today, Jen. Can you just explain why you are unhappy with these proposals?
So I am all for the principle of welfare reform, and I think someone said earlier all parties seem to agree that it's indeed necessary. However, there is a lot in this bill that I have really deep concerns about, particularly their impact on disabled people. I don't think that disabled people have been engaged with or consulted with enough in the process of this bill. And I also think that we're being asked to vote on something that we don't yet fully understand what the full impact will be.
Well, the government, as is suggestion there from Ian, is that the government thinks that they can face down this rebellion.
I mean, I think it would be foolish to see it as trying to face down the numbers, if I'm honest with you.
And do you think that there is any cut in the welfare bill, the working age welfare bill, which is £170 billion? As you said, lots of people talk about reform. Are there any cuts that you would accept, or is it these particular cuts that you are against?
So these particular cuts, the worry that I have, I'm a disabled person myself, I'm a carer for a disabled child, and my experience, as it will be the experience of a lot of disabled people, is that when times are tough, and times are tough at the moment, when, the government has difficult choices to make, we always seem to be the ones bearing the brunt. And I didn't get into politics to continue that status quo. So benefits that put disabled people at a worse off position is not something that I can vote for.
And what about the argument from the government that the most severely disabled will be protected and that some of the savings will go back into trying to get people back into work?
And again, that's fine. I said at the start, there's a lot in this bill that I can see as good. Things like, the right to try work is something that disabled people and disabled people's organisations have asked for a long time. However, I don't think it's fair to start to categorise people as, you're not severely disabled enough, you don't need this benefit, when the benefit is clearly there to acknowledge the higher cost of living with a disability.
I mean, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has laid out her spending plans, and if these plans don't go through, there is then a £5 billion black hole in her calculations. Do you have any suggestions about how that should be filled?
I I mean, that's very much up to the Chancellor. She has her job to do, and I have my job to do.
She's tried to do it, hasn't she? And it looks like her party is stopping her.
I mean, I think the role of the Labour backbench, and I'm very proud to call myself part of that, is to provide this kind of conscience check. I think, you know, the government have come forward with something that they want to do, proposals that they've put out, and we as a backbench have said, well, you know, we're not willing to countenance that. And then it's up to the government to see how they resolve that issue.
You've been an MP for just under a year. Are you worried at all about undermining the Prime Minister's authority in all of this?
I don't think there is a question of necessarily undermining the Prime Minister's authority. Like I said, he's got a job to do, an extraordinarily tough and difficult job, but I've also got my job to do. And I came into this, my primary motivator for coming into this job was to improve the lives of people like my daughter. And to be honest, I can't look at this bill and vote for it with the provisions that it has in it.
And what are your whips? What are the party leadership saying to you about all of this?
I mean, there have certainly been some interesting private conversations, I think. I will leave it there.
Tell us, Jen, do tell us.
No, I will leave it at that. I mean, there have been some interesting discussions in private, and I would describe myself as a loyalist. I describe myself as fairly sensible, level-headed politician, but and I have exhausted as many of the sort of private avenues on this that I could go to, and I think the time has come for any of us that have concerns about this. We've had to put our head above the parapet, and it's not a decision that any of us take easily. It's not something I've done on a whim. It was a well thought out decision that I took.
OK, Jen, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us today. I mean, Andrew, if these don't go through, where will the money come from?
Well, look, first of all, I just want to say Jen is a friend. I have huge admiration for her. We're part of the 2024 intake. One thing I would add is that the PIP changes, the PIP reassessment criteria, which is at the heart of a lot of concerns that people have, the changes won't come into effect, even if this were to pass, until November 2026. I think that's important to highlight.
And then there is a transition period, I think.
Then there's a 13-week
13
transition period. And it matters because of the pace at which this is moving right now. You know, and as I said to you in my earlier comments, there is an opportunity in this next week for all of us to come together as the parties, have a conversation about, you know, is this the moment that we have to go ahead with this? Because colleagues like Jen don't do something like that lightly. I'm going to continue to have those private conversations. As I said, I'm going to continue to think very hard about what I do, but I hope there's a way through on this.
But for a lot of Labour MPs, it isn't just a matter of timing, I don't think. It sounds from Jen and from others that they just won't accept any cuts, any changes to PIP.
I think part of it is about impact assessments. Have we seen the full impact assessment? We will have another OBR review of the public finances ahead of the budget. That's really important. The OBR says themselves that they only get the forecast right 50% of the time. Sometimes things move in the favour of the government, sometimes they don't. So all of those are still live questions before any of these changes would take effect.
So, Kate, what's your party going to do?
That's a very good question. I don't actually know. We'll have to see what Kemi decides to do. I mean, look, I think you could help Keir Starmer get them through. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think we accept that there needs to be welfare reform. Okay. Whether this has been correctly thought out or not, I don't know. And while it is £5 billion, I mean, to be honest with you, if the Chancellor wants to get herself out of trouble, she could find that money from elsewhere. I mean, the active travel budget in the Department for Transport, that runs into hundreds of millions, if not over £1 billion. I think it was something like 12 billion over the next few years that we're spending on walking and cycling. Well, nice to have, but it's a rainy day. Let's spend it on this. So she'll find a way out of it. And my prediction is they'll cancel it and then they'll wrap it into the budget later this year and make it a kind of confidence issue. But I think what's really interesting for this is the kind of political dynamic, because one of the things I've learned in the last 10 years is that if you're an MP and you rebel against your party, once you've done it once, it becomes easier and easier to do, particularly when there's safety in numbers, right? That's why you see the numbers kind of accelerate, because people see, oh, there's like 50, I'm not isolating myself here, and then 120, and suddenly, I bet you by the time we get to next Tuesday, it'll be up over 150 and maybe towards 200. So that is a very dangerous position for the Prime Minister to be in. It's high stakes, right? Because once his party's decided we can do this now, we suddenly feel powerful, they'll do it again and again. I mean, I'm one of the few Tories that supports recognition of Palestine. I know there are a very large number of Labour MPs who are itching for the party to do the same. I'd love to see them do the same on this issue too, right? Because I think it'd be a big step forward for peace in that region. So I think that is very high stakes for the future of the government.
So just coming back to the actual cuts and welfare, your party promised £12 billion, I think, of cuts to the welfare budget. But, I mean, I think, the Economist said it was pie in the sky.
Well, OK, it is extremely difficult. And as the Prime Minister's learning, I mean, particularly the disability budget is the kind of third rail. I mean, we tried this in the past, right? When I was in the early stages of my career, we tried to make reforms to the work-related and the support-related activity group in disability benefit, and there was an enormous kickback. It was massively controversial, even though our objective was to try and get more disabled people into work, because the percentage who were was tiny. So it's a very difficult one to handle. And frankly, if you haven't done the political spade work of getting your backbenchers on side, it becomes even more difficult. But to be honest with you, with 4 years to go to a general election, we don't know what the budget is going to be.
But you're making it sound like it's almost impossible to do.
Well, it's difficult.
The sort of will is there.
It's very difficult politically. As I say, I would not start with the disabled or the elderly. I mean, we've been very clear on the winter fuel payment. We would not have done that. We might have looked, as Matthew said, at work incentives through universal
Matthew,
credit.
do you want to come? What do you think? What do you think the way is to do this?
Well, I mean, historically, the Labour Party was the party for Labour. It was a party for people who work, who contribute, who pay taxes, and who all accept the principle of fairness that has long run through this country. What we now have, I think, is a Labour government that is more interested in giving people incentives to stay out of work than get back into the economy. The welfare system, as it is currently organised, doesn't make sense for many people to go back into the labour market, and that's being compounded, I would argue, and I appreciate some people may think differently, but I think that's being compounded by a lot of other choices that the Labour government is making, particularly around things like mass migration, which are then also clogging up the economy, giving people yet another reason not to come into the marketplace. So we need to get a lot more people off welfare back into work, for them, if nothing else, to give them a sense of meaning and dignity and so forth.
I mean, the government would say that's what they're trying to do here, but £1 billion of this will go to that.
I would say, where's the comprehensive strategy for getting people back to work?
Andrew?
Well, I was just going to jump in on that. First of all, we're unashamedly the party of work. Last year, one of the single biggest increases in the minimum wage for a decade and beyond, 6.7%, more than that for people under the age of 21. We've got really important reforms coming through to childcare, because childcare matters hugely to people. People need to be in a position where they are supported to go back into work through the childcare system. So they are parts of our record that I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to do. And of course, that we're not having this debate in a void. We are 1 year into a government after 14 years that went before it. And on the big strategic calls, I think the Chancellor and this government are getting things right. This is a difficult conversation we are having right now, but we're unashamedly a party.
But do you think it's acceptable that we are paying 2 or 3 times as much on welfare than defence in this country? That's crazy to me.
I mean, it's... Go on, Ed.
Many of these benefits are in-work benefits. PIP is an in-work benefit. Universal credit is an in-work benefit. One of the reasons people have to be on benefits while they're working is because work is not paying sufficiently, because they're subject to 0-hours contracts and all of that sort of thing. So we've got to think a bit more clearly about the welfare bill. The figure that was being bandied about then, you're talking as though it's just people who are kind of layabout scroungers, essentially.
I've never used those words.
No,
I've never used those words.
But that's the implication of what you're...
No, I've never used those words. Can
I finish what I'm saying?
Well, if
that's
you
the
use...
implication. The implication of what you're saying is that everybody who's on benefits is essentially not, a drain on society.
I haven't used those words either.
But actually,
I haven't used those words either.
Actually, what these benefits do, for example, PIP and universal credit, is it helps people into the workplace.
One in six people on PIP are in work. It's 1 in 6. And it's not the majority.
And last week in Parliament, I was meeting people from a disabled people's lobby group who were saying, look, this is ridiculous. The government's proposals are to take money away from us next year, but the employment support won't be there until 2029. It's completely the wrong way round. There are many people with disabilities who do want to work, but the support isn't available.
Let Matthew come back on that.
I never used any of those words that you just attributed to me. What I said is we have a welfare system in this country which incentivises people to stay out of the labour market. That's not a judgment on those people. I do not personally believe that close to 1 in 4 working-age adults are disabled or have mental health issues. I think the assessment for much of that is much too loose, and I think as a consequence we are, as Kit alluded to, we are handing down to our children and our grandchildren a welfare state, an economy that is going to bankrupt this country and is going to give them an enormous pile of debt, bigger than the debt we've even got now, by the way, which is going to be completely unsustainable. We cannot keep giving people welfare while actively not incentivising them back into the labour market. This is crazy. This is not a sustainable situation.
We need we need to support people into work, and we need to support people into work. But we also need to ask ourselves, why are there so many people who are so unwell? Why are there so many people in our society really, really struggling with mental health problems? They're not making it up. Why are there so many millions of people on health-related benefits?
Matthew, do you want to answer that?
Just
answer that, and then we'll bring
think there are so many?
I think there are a whole bunch of factors. We have an incredibly unequal society in which young people these days do not have anywhere close to the opportunities that people of an older generation had. It's impossible to get on the housing ladder.
This is just grievance after grievance. We've got 1 million young people outside of the labour market.
These are realities.
Kids I used to teach at university, right? No longer in education, employment, training or work. What you're saying to them is, here's a whole bunch of grievances as to why you shouldn't work and stay on the welfare state. You're going to make their lives worse. What those people need is a good reason and a strategy from the government to get back into work, to get meaning, dignity and responsibility, which is what will actually also help drive the economy, which we need to support.
I agree.
Let me just bring Kit. Let Kit have a word here.
This was the point that I just want to emphasise, because to a certain extent, I don't mean to be flippant, but we could fall into the seeming like, bald men fighting over a comb. If you haven't got the underlying economy that is producing the employment and the tax revenue to pay for all this stuff, you're in big trouble. And one of the key things that we often lose sight of as we argue about the welfare system is that the economy is broadly flatlining. Employment levels are dropping, unemployment is rising, vacancies are reducing. The massive level of taxation, and this speaks to your desire, Ellie, I'm afraid, for more taxation on an economy that's already struggling under the burden of taxation.
More taxation on specific
is drowning out
groups of people.
Private sector activity. And if you look at what the government's done, it's basically the economic strategy seems to be to borrow a load of money, use it to crowd out the private sector, shrink their ability to make money to pay for all this stuff, and hope for the best. And I think that if we don't get that foundation right, we're in really big trouble.
Andrew,
Thank you, Vicki. I want to take on a couple of things that Matt said. First of all, do we have strategy? One of the key elements for it is our youth guarantee. So we have a guarantee as the government. Anyone aged 18 to 21 will be found the opportunity to be in work or training. That is hugely important and a significant step forward. The mental health conversation, I have these conversations with constituents coming to my surgery week in, week out, in schools as well. There is a mental health crisis, and it is linked to the crisis in our National Health Service. We inherited an NHS that was broken, waiting lists the highest on record.
Something happened in COVID.
And
you can see in the numbers
but the trend was very clear, I'm afraid, Kit, before that point, and that's unarguable, I think, is that we have to get a grip on the National Health Service. And it's no small achievement that we have started to get waiting lists down. And I meet countless people who actually are desperate to work, particularly young people. I was at a school yesterday. They are desperate to have the opportunities to get on in life. But sometimes there are health barriers that are preventing with them, and we have to get a grip with the NHS. These two things are intertwined.
And still, we're not investing enough in mental health support in the NHS, which means that people are stuck.
OK. Don't forget, we are on at the earlier time of 11:15 tomorrow for all the build-up, live coverage and analysis of Prime Minister's questions. Now, the Prime Minister has, in fact, just landed in the Netherlands. He's there for the NATO summit, and one of the key things that is going to be discussed will be defence spending. Take a look at this headline, this BBC headline. The UK vows to spend 5% of GDP on national security by 2035. Now, this amounts to an extra £40 billion a year. So I guess the most important question, talking about where savings is going to be found, but where is this money going to be found? £40 billion a year?
Well,
it's an uncosted promise.
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to see the Prime Minister amongst allies, NATO allies today. Labour Party, the post-war Labour government took us into NATO, I believe, proudly. It's one of our proudest achievements in government. And at a time of such uncertainty internationally, I'm pleased he is there at the heart of this debate. He's also acted decisively on defence spending. I was in the Commons chamber, as you said, we're less than a year in as a backbench MP, where he made that announcement to directly switch funding from the aid budget to the defence budget. And that wasn't necessarily comfortable for many of us, but it was decisive and it was the right thing to do in the situation
So
we
that
find
bit is
ourselves.
costed, but the next bit isn't costed,
But
is it?
what I would say, though, that is evidence of action from the Prime Minister on an issue that is so important. And we live in a completely changed world.
But my question is, how are you going to pay for it? Anyone can say we're going to spend an extra £40 billion on defence.
Well, my answer, we've demonstrated already the ability to make tough choices in order to invest in defence. We've had a strategic...
Well, you actually backtracked on winter fuel allowance, didn't you?
But
that was
not
1.5 billion.
But not on defence spending. That is locked in. We've had a strategic defence review, and by the way, that had to come first because we need to understand, how our armed forces need to be equipped for the 21st century. And I have every confidence that we will spell out the funding. And by the way, we're talking about 5% today. 3.5% is defence, 1.5% is additional resilience.
Yeah, so it's weapons and troops, really, the core defence budget, and then there will be other things. Kit, how would the Tory party pay for this? You presumably do agree with this extra
well, I don't know if I do or I don't. I mean,
Okay.
I find these things that leading politicians, 5% this, 4% that, it's meaningless, right? I'm interested in the capability. I want to know what we need to be able to do, and then how we're going to get there and how much it's going to cost, right? The removal of the American curtain of protection to a certain extent. I mean,
do you agree with the 3%?
There we were all
3%.
thinking that these jets stationed in Suffolk and elsewhere were for our protection too. Turns out they might not be. So we're having to all recalibrate. Do I think there should generally be more spent on defence? Well, it sounds like there should be. Do I think the defence establishment has made some dumb decisions in the past? Yes. I mean, we had the deafening tank while we were in power that cost us whatever 4 or 5 billion to correct. So the general trend I would welcome. In terms of how they might pay for it, as I say, there are lots and lots of budget heads that you can find. It sounds like it's going to be partly from the disabled if they push through the changes on welfare that they want to. But as I say, I'm less interested in the percentage figures, and I am in the capability. What do we need to be capable of as a nation for our own defence?
Do you think these NATO countries are doing it to implicate Donald Trump?
I think so, and I think there's a bit of headline. We need a bit of a press, a press release coming out of this thing. Let's all say 5% will sound good. I mean, we've done this in the past and never actually got there. Right, so who
Ellie,
knows?
where are you? Where's the Green Party on this?
Honestly, I mean, it's pick a number at the moment, isn't it? It was 2.5, then NATO said 3, and now 5%. I mean, what'll it be next week? But the idea that you buy security by buying more bombs is ridiculous. It's not the right way to think about security. We should be having a much broader conversation about what real human security looks like. If you look at, in the last 10 years, what was it that killed hundreds of thousands of people in the UK? It was COVID. If you look at what's going to cause us the most economic damage in coming decades, it's climate change. We should be thinking about security with much broader parameters, cyber security as well. Instead, we've got people who are talking about, the government a couple of weeks ago in its strategic defence review, committing to paying £15 billion to buy new nuclear warheads, incredibly expensive weapons that can and should never, ever be used, effectively breaching our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and trying to justify it on the basis of arguing that this is somehow an investment in British industry. The subsidy per job is £1 million per job for those sorts of things.
So you wouldn't
Other
increase...
sorts of industries are far more economically beneficial.
You wouldn't increase defence spending? What do you think?
Increasing defence spending is obviously what we've got to do in order to secure the security of our country and indeed Europe. We've been living in a security blanket provided by the United States for so long, and understandably they're irritated. Here's one thing you could do to raise that money while also actually improving the security and safety of the British people. You could raise at least a quarter of that immediately by fixing our borders and stopping the small boats, which is costing between £7 and £10 billion every year, and we know has been used by Iranian terrorists to come into our country. Labour could make, as you say, a tough choice by fixing our borders. We could dramatically reduce the amount of welfare that we pay. We could also continue to drive down the foreign aid budget until we can actually provide security for our own people. There's a few ideas.
I think I need to come back. Just briefly on Ellie. Look, I'm fond on Ellie, and there's lots we fond of Ellie, lots we agree on, particularly on the European Union. I'm worried about the position of the Green Party on NATO. Over the years, it's wanted to withdraw from NATO. I believe it currently wants to be a member, but there is a leadership contest going along at the moment where one of the leading candidates wants to pull us out. OK, fine, but it's caused real confusion and concern among voters. It has, and look, security matters, and it matters to people. Right now, we have 200,000 Ukrainians who I'm so pleased we have welcomed with open arms into this country, who are fleeing conflict in mainland Europe. But this is desperately serious. And that's why defence spending matters.
And for 20 years prior to that, this country basically appeased Putin. You know, we cannot separate out defence, as in guns and bombs and, you know, arms and people killing people, from a much broader, longer-term conversation about what real security means, which is why it's so totally counterproductive and short-sighted to slash the aid budget in order to spend more on weaponry, because the aid budget, development and diplomacy are key to building peace globally. None of us is an island. We're all interconnected. That has come home to roost. And we've got to recognise, by the way, on this point about shutting the borders, how many right-wingers have you heard say that for years, as though it's something you just click your finger?
What
we need is safe and legal routes.
Have basic border security so we don't have terrorists coming into our country on the small boats.
Safe and legal routes.
I mean, this green world that we're going to live in is terrifying. We're going to appease Putin while not having nuclear bombs.
I just talked about appeasing Putin. I just said that this country appeased Putin for far too long.
How can you appease Putin while simultaneously getting rid of nuclear weapons?
Nuclear weapons do not make the world a safer place.
Right, so how do you think Putin's going to take us seriously?
They make it a more dangerous place. The West having nuclear weapons hasn't stopped Putin invading Ukraine, has it? It hasn't made us safe. And on borders, as we've seen, as Andrew talked about, we welcomed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees fleeing conflict to this country.
Genuine refugees.
Because we created safe and legal routes. Are you saying Are you saying the only genuine refugees in the world are the ones that come from Ukraine and Hong Kong?
I'm saying we should fix the borders and stop the boats.
That is the effect of our policies.
Okay.
We should create safe and legal routes for asylum seekers to come here.
The government hasn't.
I want to just return to the NATO summit.
Come back on this.
Because I'm just going to move on quickly here, because Donald Trump is also on his way to the NATO summit. Last night he announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. That is being there's some contradictory messages about that. Let's have a listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, OK, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
I think we can gather what he was saying there, Kit. He's not happy, is he?
He seems, to be angered in a way that, to be honest with you, we rarely see with Donald Trump. I mean, he generally, although he's a bit unpredictable, generally kind of controls his temper and tries to project a sense that he's in control. What's interesting about this, of course, is that most of his anger seems to be directed towards the Israeli side.
I mean, he announced this ceasefire last night, and Israel have effectively said, well, actually, a missile landed on us from Iran, so we're going to carry on.
Which is, he said it didn't. So they or implied it didn't. This obviously comes off the back of a original assault on Iran, which it became clear he hadn't approved and really didn't want to happen either. So it's an interesting geopolitical development from that point of view, and I do wonder now where it's going to go.
Where does this leave the situation, do you think?
Well, I mean, look, the situation is...
Can Israel just ignore America?
Well, they can't. I mean, actually, they can't. Right? America is the chief supplier of their weaponry, obviously supplies a huge amount of money and subsidy, and is easily their closest ally. So I'd be very surprised if they could. But, I mean, look, this situation is so fragile and so dangerous that the opportunity for miscalculation on any side is extremely high. And that means everybody needs to act with some delicacy and recognition of that fragility. Now, it feels like that is part of President Trump's frustration, that he thought he'd put together this kind of fragile truce overnight. I mean, when it came through last night, people would be, hooray, we've stepped back from the brink of what could have been a catastrophic exchange. And so I can see why he'd be upset.
Andrew, where does this leave the situation?
Look, it's moving at a breakneck speed, isn't it? And I endorse much of what Kit said, and I think it's a happy coincidence that the NATO summit is today, that we have 32 democracies there, leaders across the world who have the ability to affect change. I'm pleased that President Trump will be there. I'm very pleased that our Prime Minister will be there. They have built a reputation, built a relationship, and we need everybody to go back around the negotiating table.
Now, it is the 9th anniversary of the Brexit referendum. Do you remember where you were when this happened?
It looks as though the gap's going to be something like 52 to 48, so a 4-point lead for leaving the EU. And that's the result of this referendum, which has been preceded by weeks and months of argument and dispute and all the rest of it. The British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
Matthew, has Brexit been a success?
Yeah, I think Brexit was the right call. I think it's also been interesting watching Labour politicians use all of the advantages and benefits of Brexit to advance, for example, the VAT increase on private schools. They wouldn't have been able to do that while we're in the EU. Over 70 trade agreements, including your recent trade agreement with India and America. You wouldn't have been able to do that. We've saved billions every year that would have gone into the EU budget. The EU itself is a declining bloc in terms of the world economy. We'd also now be being asked to pay billions and billions on the COVID recovery loans to the EU and the EU enlargement, which is about to take in another bunch of countries who, guess what, are taking more out of the EU than they're putting in. What I would like to have seen, however, is British politicians understand what Brexit was about, which is not just returning us to be a self-governing, independent, sovereign nation and a democracy, which the EU is not. The EU is not a democracy, but actually control our borders and lower migration and build that economy that Labour seems incapable of building, which is prosperous and high growth.
Well, there has been a lot of immigration, legal immigration, but from non-EU countries.
Absolutely. What Boris Johnson did is he lied to the country by saying he would lower the overall numbers and give us a high-skill migration system, which everybody said, hey, that sounds like a good idea. He gave us a low-skill, low-wage migration policy, with now 81% of all migration coming from outside of Europe. So guess what? We have low growth. Well, why do we have low growth? Because we have flooded our economy with cheap workers, so businesses don't have any incentive to innovate. And the promise of Brexit, which is still there, we could still use it if we want, has been basically betrayed by a lot of politicians who are too scared to seize it.
Andrew, you were, I think, what they used to call a Remainer.
Yes, look, a rare thing, a form of words from Matt Goodwin that I would agree with. He said that Boris Johnson lied to the country, absolutely, but we don't have long enough left in our segment to go into that. Look, I mean, Matt is living in a parallel universe. Brexit has been destructive to our economy. There was a report out just this week on the 9-year anniversary. It says that the damage done has been to the tune of £100 billion. We've forgone £40 billion in tax revenue. That's the entire sum that we had to raise in last year's budget. And do you know what's most powerful about it? Is the businesses that I meet who have been most badly impacted are the small and medium-sized enterprises. So many of them have been forced out of business altogether, drowning in bureaucracy and red tape, but because we left the single market, because we left the single best thing that a Conservative government did,
so do you want to go back into the single market? Go back into the single market?
What I am pleased about is that we're having a reset. That we have the grown-ups back in the room, that Keir Starmer has begun to mend the relationships with our EU leaders, and we've got a path forward now on lots of things, including youth mobility, by the way, which I'm particularly passionate about.
Now, Kit, your name for some of us journalists from the Brexit, the Malthouse Compromise. Anyway, I can't even go into this.
I will be an obscure GCSE question.
You will. Has Brexit been a success?
So I voted Leave, and I do believe it has been, yeah. I mean, you come at this depending on why you voted Leave, right? I was a sovereignty person and believed that I didn't want to be part of a huge political operation in Europe that was distant from the people that I was serving and was, as far as I could see, heading towards oblivion anyway. So for me, the return of our sovereignty was great. I wrote at the time that I thought it might come at a medium-term cost. But in the long term, given the decline of Europe as an economic pole and the shift of the global tectonic economic plates to the east, meant that the rejigging of our trading patterns towards the east was going to be necessary anyway, and we would be much better off doing that with the European Union. And to be honest with you, to add to the benefits that Matthew said, we could not have done a trade deal with the United States that the Prime Minister's been
Ellie, do you want to come back on that?
over the last year, which has separated out some of our big, hairy industries from those in Europe.
The net economic damage caused by Brexit has been huge. It's it's been a disastrous decision for the country. And actually, the majority of British people recognise that. Public opinion recognises that Brexit was a mistake. We were sold a pup, basically, by a snake oil salesman, essentially.
But Ellie, I didn't get that, because the German economy's been tanking, the Italian economy's been tanking. I mean, since we left, the Greeks have been through dreadful economic hardship. Being in the EU is no guarantee of economic success. Even when we were in, we had massive recessions.
Even when we were in, Greece was doing, we were doing better than Greece, etc., etc. You just by being in the European Union, your economy isn't exactly tied to the fortunes of every other European member. But what we did have was frictionless trade in goods and services and frictionless mobility, which was good for us and for people.
Getting Brexit into 4 minutes. That's all for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 11:15 here on BBC Two.